Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education. It is Wednesday, April 21st, almost 2 p.m. We are starting our day today looking at S100, returning to S100. It's my hope that we'll have a committee vote on this tomorrow. This is the amendment to the Universal School Meals Bill that would move us in the direction of universal breakfasts. As well as it puts language in there for a study to get us to universal meals. Additionally, there is language that will be in the big bill related to making that connection between local farms, local foods, and schools. So all of these pieces will be traveling in different ways and will be explained by senators, I suspect Pearson, Starr on the floor. And then I'm happy to explain our amendment unless someone else it's important for them to do so. And I have no problem with that. So, or if they would just like to. So with that, I'm wondering if we have any questions. Senator Hooker, you had mentioned something to me about a path forward or a question with this?
With regard to what's happening nationally and the universal meals are going to go for the next couple of years, would there be need to have language that says this program wouldn't begin until or such time that that program ended, and then also perhaps refer to the idea that with the study, if we find a path forward for universal meals, that only including breakfast would be preempted.
Yeah, good question. And I know we have Ms. Kruger here who may be able to weigh in on that once we're ready to do so, but I think that's an excellent point. So just if senators have it in front of them, it's S100 draft 5.1, I believe. Is that accurate, Jim? 5.1?
5.1, yes.
5.1. And I'll just kick it off, giving a little bit, just bringing everybody back to where we are. And then I think Jim will have some questions. But this moves us again in the direction of universal school breakfasts. It is, there's some language in here that we will look at from Ms. Kruger that, again, is helping with some of the bookkeeping and tracking from the Agency of Education, as I understand it. And of course, the study that gets the state to universal school meals. I believe we have a 5-year period to do that. And I'm looking to Mr. Denray on that, shaking his head, yes. There are still some outstanding questions around financing, but I'm wondering if we might, Mr. Denray, just give us again some of the highlights and if there's something I'm missing, as well as any questions that you need the committee to answer. I know you have a couple of spots in this bill that are still blank.
Yep. Okay. Should I bring the bill up, or?
If you don't mind, this time I think it might make sense, since senators might not be able to track it down as easily. Thanks.
Okay. So. Jane, can you let me show the screen? Oh, great, thank you. Go. Oh, sorry, must have closed it. Hold on.
Jim, if it's a pain, don't worry about it.
It's not pain. No, okay. I usually have things open and waiting for me, but this one got closed. So let me just pull this up. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Okay, give me 1 minute. Move over here. Okay. All right, so I can share it now. Okay, apologies for the delay.
No problem.
So we've got, for the record, Jim Damer, the console, we're walking through draft 5.1 of the amendment to S100. This right now is a floor amendment, and all the members of the Senate Agriculture Committee are on this as sponsors.
And I'll just
so that's where it stands now.
I'll ask you to pause there. I'm hoping that it would be everyone in this committee, I would more than welcome joining this amendment so that we are moving to the floor in a united front, if you will. And we can talk about that later.
Okay.
So as usual, changes are highlighted in yellow. So the act name now is Universal School Breakfast and creation of the Task Force on Universal School Lunch Act. Mouthful, but the changes are to on the task force. Senate Agriculture wanted to have them have a time frame of achieving the goal of universal school lunch. So that is now here as the 26-27 school year. Then we go into the way in which the funding will work for the universal school breakfast. So as a reminder, this hasn't changed, but in 2A here, you are providing state funds to reimburse school districts for school breakfast. This language here, how it works, the mechanics in B, I'm going to defer to Rosie to explain how this reimbursement works. So should I stop there and defer now, or should I wait till the end?
I think it'd be great to have Rosie jump in now, if that's okay.
Great.
Thanks, Rosie. And it looks like we have Pro Tem Perchlik. Yes, I think, yes, there is the Pro Tem. Pro Tem Perchlik, are you with us before we move on here?
I am.
Okay, terrific. So we're on B, which is the reimbursement for the Agency of Education. So Rosie, you're up.
For the record, Rosie Kruger, State Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Agency of Education. So the way that the bill was originally structured, there was some question about whether we would have to reimburse for the actual costs that each school incurred for each meal, which could vary widely among different schools, depending on what particular ingredients they chose to use and what their labor costs were. And so instead, we would prefer, for simplification, to set a per meal rate that each school would receive. And it seemed like the fairest way to do that would be to set that rate at the difference between the federal free reimbursement rate and the federal paid reimbursement rate. And that would mean that each school would get the exact same amount of money for every meal that they served. And so they would be able to count on getting that amount of money. Some of it would be coming from the feds and some of it would be coming from the state. I will note that this language, you actually, because you're just doing breakfast, you don't need this last sentence anymore. These rates shall include performance-based cash reimbursement as determined by the USDA. That just applies to lunch.
Okay.
There's no cash performance-based reimbursement for breakfast, so you could strike that. But if you were to be discussing this for lunch, you would need that language in there.
So what exactly, and I apologize, this is probably just me that's wondering it, but some equal to the federal reimbursement rate for free school breakfast, less the federal, so minus the federal reimbursement rate for paid school breakfast. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the federal government does provide some reimbursement for every paid breakfast. I guess I should back up and say that children apply, or households apply to be eligible for free and reduced school meals. So each child has a status. They're either considered free eligible, reduced eligible, or paid if they're not free or reduced eligible. And so when the child goes through the line, the school is tracking which children eat, and each child has a status. And so that meal receives reimbursement from the feds and from the state based on the child's status. So if a child is eligible for free meals, there is, I can just pull up the, I had the reimbursement rates up earlier. Pull those up for you. So using this year's rates, if the child was eligible for free meals, the school would get $1.89 in federal funding for that meal. If the child was eligible for reduced price meals, the school would get $1.59 in federal funding and an additional 30 cents in state funding. So that would bring it up to $1.89. And then if the child was not eligible for free or reduced meals, the school would get 32 cents in federal funding. And then usually the household would pay for whatever the school set as their price for paid meals. So it's usually very similar to what they get for the free reimbursement rate. It might be, $1.75 in this case. And so in order to get that funding from the state, rather than asking the household to pay that, we need to figure out what's the rate that the state is going to pay. And so we're setting that here at the difference between the federal free rate, which is $1.89, and the federal paid rate, which is 32 cents. And so that amount that the state would be paying for every paid lunch that was served would be $1.59.
That's correct. Great. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that.
And those rates, I should say, do change every single year. And July 1st, USDA updates the rates. So they're scaled for inflation-ish. It's based on some CPI metrics about how much it costs to produce the breakfast.
Okay. Questions? Ms. Parker, did you want to weigh in on this?
I just wanted to add that this was the method that I used in the fiscal note that I sent out when we first had this proposal. So those estimates that you have been considering are reflective of this language as well.
Great. Thank you for adding that.
You're welcome.
Questions, committee at this point?
Senator Campion?
Yes, Campion.
Thank you. Rosie, thank you for this information. And I just need a clarification on how the cost is going to affect individual school districts. So that I know the concern from the school districts originally with universal meals was that it was going to be competing with other costs that they had. So this is not going to cost the school district per se any dollars. That it's not going to be part of their budget. Am I correct in assuming that?
I think that's the intention. Now, there is the potential that right now a school could be charging a much higher rate for paid breakfasts. So a school could have said, paid families, you have to pay $3 for breakfast. And so now they're not going to get that rate from the families. They're just going to get the set rate from the state. And that may be lower than what their current charge is. I don't think that's the case in most places. I think that the price set is pretty close to what they get for reimbursement. But schools will have to decide, is this going to be a problem for us? If so, they have the option to try to cut costs, or they can try and find some additional funds to offset that cost. One option is general fund. They also have the option of trying to earn additional revenue through a la carte sales or catering revenue, setting their adult meal price a little bit higher. So there are some additional places that they could raise money that are not simply general fund. The other piece that I would add is that I think that with universal breakfast, you expect to see much higher participation, which should allow for a greater economy of scale. And so the schools may find that, even though on a per meal basis, they're actually bringing in a little bit less money those who were charging a higher price for their paid students, they may be bringing in a little less money per meal. They are now serving a lot more meals, and so therefore they have a better economy of scale. And so generally, I think it's probably going to come out in the wash. But a particular school who charges a lot for their breakfast for their paid students right now could see, that they need to make up some funds.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Terenzini.
Thank you, Senator Kimmy. I'll piggyback Rosie, Senator Hooker's question, just from my own understanding, because we've gone back and forth, with this bill, several versions now in different committees, and it's really going to be a deciding factor if I support the bill or not. At the end of the day, if I have a good understanding of this, and I think you just answered it, but I'm going to ask my question anyway. Next fall, when schools start to structure their budget for town meeting day, they're not going to have to put a line item in their budget for $50,000, $150,000, $500,000, whatever it is, to pay for this program. This money is going to come from the state and feds, and we're not going to have to raise these budgets at the local level. Correct?
That should be generally true across the board. There may be those programs that decide we want to put more into our program than we're getting in the reimbursement, and so we're going to add a line. But I think those are probably folks who are already doing that. So we're not asking them to do that. I think that's a better way of saying it. They could choose to do something more, but the state is not imposing a requirement the way that previous versions of this bill had been written.
Okay, so I can go around to Rutland County school boards after I vote for this and say with confidence, I did not increase your local budget expenditures by voting for this bill.
Yeah, I think that would be a fair thing to say.
Thank you.
Could I clarify, though, that this is coming off the education fund, so it will affect tax rates?
That's a good point, Jim.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Jim. I understand that, but my biggest fear of the program was that we were going to pass this, and then you'd see a bunch of school budgets fail in March because there was such a large increase because they had to pay for this at the local level, and that certainly wouldn't be a good deal either for anyone. So, but I appreciate your help, the both of you.
Thank you. Ms. Kruger, anything else that you want to add before we continue with Mr. Desmarais?
I do think, to Senator Hooker's point at the beginning, there was an announcement yesterday by USDA about some waivers for next year that's definitely going to impact your thinking on timing here. So I definitely want to spend some time talking about that today, but I don't see a reason to not continue with the bill review.
Okay, and when we get to the timing, we'll pause. If you still, I know you have a tricky schedule this afternoon, so as long as you can stick with us.
3 o'clock.
Oh, terrific. Great. Mr. Desmarais, please, picking up on line 17, food program.
Yeah, okay, there aren't many changes to discuss, so just the language again.
Senator Chittenden, please.
I'm sorry, before we lose track of Senator Terenzini's, I recognize Mark Peral was really trying to get attention, and I think it's a point that I wanted clarity on. This does come off of the top of the ed fund, which affects the yield, which does affect property taxes, but it doesn't apply a mandate forcing school districts to have to fund this over anything else. But if you would recognize him, Chair Campion, I'd love to hear what Mark Peral wanted to add on that.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Chittenden. I apologize, Mr. Peral, and I think Senator Chittenden's summary was excellent. Mark, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think Jim nailed it. I just wanted to make it clear that this money's coming out of the education fund, whether it shows up on local budgets or it comes off the top, as you call it, coming off the top of the ed fund. And the cost will be spread out over every district. Same amount of money is going to end up coming out of the ed fund, whether you have this appear in local budgets or if it comes off the top of the fund. You're right that it won't show up in budget deliberations because it's not going to be, it'll be come off the budget, so they won't see it in their education spending per pupil directly, but it is going to lower the yield and raise taxes. So
I'm looking for hands. Yeah, Senator Chittenden.
Just thank you. That was my understanding, and I'm still trying to understand ed funding in the state, and that was very validating, Mr. Peral. So thank you for confirming that this will lower the yield, which effectively raises everybody's tax rates.
And Senator Campion, if I
Yes,
can
please
follow along on that, and Mark, do we have an idea of what that's going to look like?
It depends on the cost. For about I think it's $8 million is equivalent to about 1 penny on both the homestead and non-homestead tax rates.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's about the estimate for universal breakfast. So we're looking at about a penny increase.
And just one other clarification for Senator Chittenden. If it comes off the top of the education fund, the cost is spread out over all property taxpayers, homestead as well as non-homestead payers. Okay. If it shows up in the budgets, it's going to hit directly, at least initially, on the local budgets.
And one thing I just want to add, and maybe Mr. Pearl or Ms. Parker, you can respond to this. I know Senator Pearson has been talking, and the Ag Committee has been talking about how the ed fund is, I'm just going to put it into my own words here, is up. There's been increased dollars because of sales tax, etc. And I'm just looking for some accuracy around that.
Yeah, the education fund is looking pretty healthy right now.
Okay.
Compared to where we thought it was going to be back in December and even in January, because school spending came in so low.
Yes.
But the surplus money that's available in the education fund right now, which is about, the Senate hasn't acted on this yet, but the House passed version, there's about $16 million in surplus funds available.
Okay. That's about what they talked about.
Right, but those are one-time monies. So
I understand. Yeah.
They're spent. So.
Okay. Okay. I don't see any other hands. If you would please continue.
Okay. All right. So next change is just moving language. So this language about counting time was in here before our session law, and I've moved it into the statute. And then the appropriation is blank, so that needs to be filled in.
Mm-hmm. And while we're on that, if you don't mind, Jim, we have Ms. Parker here, and I suspect that the recommendation for that blank would come from you. And then I know our Appropriations Committee has already seen this draft, and I'm told from Senator Starr that they are endorsing it, and I'm not sure what dollar amount they're looking at, but I suspect it's the 8 million. Ms. Parker.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Campion.
No problem.
I would say, based on my estimates, that an $8 million appropriation would be adequate for universal breakfast. If you recall, the range that I provided earlier was between $6 and $10 million. That's largely depending on participation rates. And so I believe that $8 million would be an appropriate amount of money, especially going into this first year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, then we continue on, and we're in the task force. So again, now we just bring this time frame in 5 years to get to universal lunch. It's here and it's here. And it's that. The effective date is on passage, so we talk about timing, and then after passage, the act how changes to an act relating to universal school breakfast and the creation of the task force on your universal school lunch. So while we're on the effective date, maybe we should talk about timing.
That would be great. Ms. Kruger.
Sure. So you probably all saw the news yesterday that USDA has issued 12 waivers impacting the child nutrition programs for school year 21 to 22. And in general, the waivers extend a lot of the flexibilities that we currently have, but they instruct us to move schools from using the summer food service program to feed children during this unique time to start using something called the seamless summer option during next school year. And that doesn't have a whole lot of impact for you all. Under both programs, children are served for free. There's no charge to the child. But one thing that we're trying to figure out right now, and that I'm a little bit, I don't know for sure, is whether all meals are going to be reimbursed at the free rate for all schools. And there's some question about whether USDA has waived the area eligibility requirements under the seamless summer option or not. All of their press releases and their messaging indicate that they intended that to be the case. And so it sounds like USDA is intending to pay for all meals served to all school children next year at the free reimbursement rate. And so there would be, of course, no need for additional state funds if that's the case. But there is a little bit of question about whether that's what they actually did. And my fear, and I'm trying to get this squared away with USDA right now, is that while children won't be able to be charged for meals if schools use this option, some schools that are more affluent will need to come up with some of the costs to pay for some of those meals themselves, that some of those meals won't be reimbursed at the free rate. It doesn't seem like that was USDA's intention. So I think that it's very likely that they've basically provided an avenue for us to continue feeding all kids at the free rate, and the feds pay for everything for next school year. But I can't tell you that with 100% certainty today. We should know more within the next week or so. So if that's the case, you could continue on with this bill. The way the bill is written, the state's going to pay for the difference between the free and paid reimbursement rate. So next year there is no difference. So then the state wouldn't incur those costs. So there's not, I don't see a huge problem with you going ahead and passing this bill. This isn't going to prevent us from taking advantage of the USDA waivers. But one thing that I would caution you is that the feds are right now, or Congress is about to take up the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act, which could involve some significant changes to the child nutrition programs. In addition, there are a number of bills that have been introduced or are being introduced that take various steps in terms of universal meals or making some of these options that we've talked about more achievable. So if you go ahead and pass this through at this point, there's the potential that, in fall of 2022, we're in a similar situation to where we were, a few weeks ago, where we thought we were going to have to go back to charging for meals next year. This kind of fits right in. We're able to go ahead and provide the universal breakfast, and there aren't changes needed. But there's also the potential that the feds will have made enough changes in the interim that the bill that you passed today doesn't quite line up with their programs as they're written at that point. So you may want to think about whether to kind of set this aside for a little while until we get a chance to see what the feds are doing, or whether you want to proceed with the understanding that you may need to amend it before we actually do anything with it.
Thank you for that, Ms. Kruger. And thanks so much for keeping our eyes on what's happening and may happen down in Washington. Very helpful. Given my inclination is to continue with the Senate Ag and this committee's, the proposal that's on the table, knowing that it will go to the House, and we know that the House, from what we're hearing, is not necessarily going to be moving on this right away, and that time actually will allow in some ways for folks to sort of adjust accordingly, if that makes sense. If we were the final stop right now, I think I would indeed say, let's just wait a little while. But since it still has a ways to go in the process, I'm inclined to continue to move forward personally. Yes, Mr. Desmarais.
Question for Rosie, really. Rosie, the federal waivers do they require schools to offer universal school breakfast, or is it just if they do, they'll be reimbursed?
That's a good point, Jim. They don't require it. They give it as an option. The schools could decide to return to using the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. That was true this year. The schools didn't have to use the summer food service program. They could have continued to charge for meals. And we saw everybody decide to go ahead and take advantage of the federal program. So I would be very surprised to see schools in Vermont not choose to take advantage of this and to charge for meals. It's just not the culture that our schools have. If there's a federal resource to help us do this, they're going to take advantage of it. But senators may feel more secure in enforcing that as a requirement.
I was thinking of a different scenario, actually, Rose. I was thinking of what if a school doesn't offer school breakfast now, right?
Yeah.
And under the waivers, they wouldn't have to offer it, but under this bill, they would.
Right. So another piece of this bill is that you've removed the exemption process. So right now there is an exemption process for schools that choose to not offer school meals, and they have to go through a public kind of hearing process and then notify the agency. There are a very small number of schools in Vermont, public schools, that do use that. Right now, those schools are all using the summer food service program to provide meals. So even though they have used that exemption process under the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program in the past, they've chosen to use the waivers this year to actually provide meals to their children. So I would imagine we would see them continue to do that this upcoming year. But it's a good point that if you want to take that exemption process away from them, that you would want to proceed with this.
Senator Chittenden.
So I think this question is for Jim and maybe just for the whole committee, but it has to do with Section 8 on the task force. And I spoke to you about this, Senator Campion. If the House does not take up this bill and it sits through until next year, that task force deadlines become moot. Do you see any reason to sever Section 8 to put that onto a separate topic or a separate bill to ensure that definitely moves forward? I'm just concerned that the House might not take it up given the remaining days left in the session.
Yeah, so I think we send it on this, and then we can also remove it and send it on our newly minted miscellaneous ed bill, which I think will likely, given some of the topics in there, it has the best shot of getting taken care of this year.
Thanks.
Yeah. You know, the other thing is, let's just all be honest here. I mean, I don't know if we ever get, without federal funding, massive federal funding to universal school meals. I could be wrong. I mean, one of the reasons that we're talking about this right now is, and we've come up with this compromise, is the price tag. And as I think Senator Terenzini said, schools would be making choices between certain policies and feeding, doing universal meals. So we may get there. We may completely get there, but we're in this moment for a reason, and that's because people are not ready to take the step. Perhaps 5 years down the road, it will be a very, very different situation, and perhaps this study and this advancement that hopefully will happen during the summer might get us there. But this is where we are, I think, at this moment. Senator Chittenden.
Yeah, so I would just, I'm trying to wrap my head around what was announced yesterday and whether or not that is putting this timeline for moving 100 with universal breakfast on the same trajectory. So I think I heard that we will know next week whether or not the language does allow for it. I'm the new guy. All right, I'm going to keep saying it until I stop getting smiles. I'm just wondering if we really.
Just so you know, I don't see anybody smiling. Just for the record, and I think we're on YouTube, right? So this is, yeah, okay.
So my point, I'm wondering if we want to rethink this, the breakfast timeline once we know for a fact whether or not this is the most useful exercise or expenditure of our time, given the announcement yesterday.
I appreciate that, and so what we we chatted a little bit about was knowing that, again, we could, if this were the last stop in this, I think we'd all be saying, let's hold on. But it would just be going to the House, where they would continue to work on it. It would be front and center for them upon upon recess, and kind of move it off of our plate and Ag's plate. Again, to your good point, it would also give time for everything to sugar off with regard to what's happening at the federal level. So, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. And to Ms. Kruger's point about this bill, there would be no payment from the state if the feds come through with money for the meals. And so this is sort of in the background. Is that what I'm hearing? And it wouldn't hurt to have it. My question is, what is the time, as Senator Chittenden's talking about, timing or time spent on whatever is required of this bill? I mean, I don't know if that's really going to make a huge difference, whether it's just there and ready to pick up when the federal funds run out, or if we just say not until the federal funds run out does this come into play. So do we have to state that, or can we just pass this bill and have it ready?
So I don't think that you need to add any special language, because the way that the bill is written right now, the amount that the state would pay is the difference between the paid and the free rate. And so if the feds pay everything at the free rate, then there's just nothing for the state to pay. So there's not anything wrong with this language existing in a world where the feds are paying all the meals at the free rate. And then when they go to, back to whatever, then this would start to kick in at that point.
So is it just a matter of kind of keeping an eye on this bill and as it's going along with what happens at the feds? I mean, I'm not looking to add any more work to the, the education department, and wouldn't want to see that happen. So having this just there is not going to increase the workload.
The thing that would increase the workload is if you were to continue the work on the bill in a way that made a lot of changes to the bill, where we had to, keep looking at new drafts and deciding, what would the impacts be. If it's, continuing on in its current form, we understand how you intend for this to work, and I don't see a whole lot of additional work there. I will say that the study committee piece of it, you've asked the Agency of Education to take the lead on creating a report about universal school lunch and how we could get there. The first meeting is supposed to happen before August 1st, which is going to be, frankly, a busy time for us as we're moving to this new seamless summer option. So that might be a place where it might be nice to have a little bit more time, and more time would give us the ability to keep a better eye on what the feds are doing as federal child nutrition reauthorization continues, because that's really going to be, I would expect that the committee would be really, reacting to what the feds are doing in terms of their recommendations for what you might consider for universal school lunch in the future.
Mr. Desmarais and Ms. Kruger, I'm just looking, as Senator Chittenden suggested, and I certainly support, and we'll see if the rest of the committee does, but if we were to remove that Section 8, given the makeup of the committee, there's no appropriation needed, given that it's Secretary of Ed, Human Services, Ag. Is that accurate, Mr. Desmarais? You're muted, but I see your head saying yes. No need.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
No,
So, and then Ms. Kruger, when would you want that discussion to start? You mentioned an August 1st deadline, knowing that could be tricky. While we have you here, what would be preferable if you know?
I'm hoping, knowing what we know now, I'm hoping that things begin to slow down a little bit in October in terms of having to, be doing a lot of work with the field to change what they're doing. So October would be a preferable first meeting time rather than prior to August 1st.
And does that give you the time needed to come back January 26, 2022, do you think? Or is that another date that might be negotiable?
I mean, I think, again, we're going to be keeping a pretty close eye on what the feds are doing.
Okay.
If the feds aren't doing anything, there's not a lot of creative, the solution is to increase taxes to pay for it. Like there's not a lot of stones unturned here. So
got it. Got it. Yeah, no, that's okay. So if the committee is comfortable, we will change that start date for the agency's request to October 10th, 2021. Ms. Kruger, that's okay?
That would be helpful.
Okay. Seeing no objection. And then Jim, if you would also, as we're preparing H101 to turn into a smaller miscellaneous education bill, which would, again, for those watching and for us and for my own brain, the State Board of Education language that has been agreed upon in terms of the change between Mr. Carroll and Secretary French, the language that we've agreed upon with regard to diversifying the State Board, and then this as well would be in that bill, and we would send that to the House with the hopes that that would they would advance all of that work. Ms. Kruger.
If I could just add, I noticed when I was reading through the bill that you have the agency consulting with outside entities in two places.
Yes.
And in the first place, you included the School Nutrition Association of Vermont, but when it came to this committee, they were not included. And I would suggest that they would be an appropriate partner to include as well.
Sorry, where were they? They were included in this ag version?
There are two different sections of the bill that talk about groups that should be consulted with. I think there's a section that just says that the agency needs to consult with a number of groups about how the implementation of the school breakfast is going. Mm-hmm. And so the School Nutrition Association is included with a number of other entities in that section, but they were not included further down, and I assume that was simply an oversight.
If Jim would be so kind as to include them, thank you.
Yep, of course. Yep.
Thanks very much. Ms. Kruger, we're getting close. Sooner or later, we are going to announce our best witness of the year. You're getting close. You've been great. You are really been terrific. And even if I say that to the next witness, ignore it. But in all seriousness, you've been just a huge help, huge asset in all of this, and appreciate your dedication. And I'm sure this is not your last visit with us, but just wanted to recognize all the work you've put in along the way. So thank you.
I appreciate the committee's willingness to work with us to make this an implementable bill. So.
Okay, any final questions before we move on to H426? So Senators, just so everyone knows, I will add, unless I hear from someone this evening, I'm planning on, I'll just add everyone's name unless you write to Jim. I'm seeing one person saying possibly no. So Terenzini, you would like to stay off of it. And it was just totally fine.
Yeah, I think at this point.
Okay. So I'm going to add all senators' names, save for Senator Terenzini. But if anybody changes their mind, including Senator Terenzini, later, we can always add or subtract. And then we'll put this on the, if Jeannie would be so kind as to put this on the agenda for tomorrow, we'll take one more look and take a vote. Great. Okay, thanks everybody. Let's, if you don't mind, I just need just a 5-minute break and then we will return to H426. So 5 minutes.